Hey, I'm Steve Knotts. Welcome to 11 Terms About Gain Staging. This is the intro to the course about gain staging, but before you can do it in Ableton Live, you have to understand what it is and what are the words we use to talk about it. I see the same question and answer all the time in the Facebook groups, and a lot of times people are saying crazy stuff that has nothing to do with what you need to know. So I'm gonna give you the definition first, and by the end of this video, you're gonna understand the definition, and that's the important part. So to clear this up, gain staging is the act of measuring and adjusting every sound in your mix from the very beginning of where it starts in one channel all the way through to the master and even through to the speakers and what you hear in your ears. So for an example, if you have a singer with a microphone, gain staging is everything from how loud they sing, how far they are from the mic, everything from the mic through the preamp and the mixer and the compressor and EQ and everything in the mix, all the way out to the amp, the speakers, the audience, and even how far the audience is from the speakers or how loud they turn up their stereo. Gain staging is everything from source to destination to the listener. Fortunately, in Ableton Live, we're only gonna work with the stuff that's inside the program, which means we're gonna look at samplers, synths, the mix, the output, all that kind of stuff, and you need to know how to do it. So let's go inside Live and we're gonna look at 11 terms related to gain staging that you need to know. Number one is the signal. That's the sound. That's the music we're working with. On a kick drum channel, the signal is the kick drum. The signal is not the background noise or the static inside your tape cassette deck or a car siren going by in the mic or anything like that. Signal just means the sound you want to work with. That leads us to signal flow. Signals flow like water through a circuit. They take the path of least resistance. They go from one place to another. I'm sure you're familiar with plugins and plugin chains. Well, think about your sound going into a plugin, out of a plugin into another one. Compressor, EQ, limiter, reverb, delay, master channel. They go through a signal flow. So it flows like water. Just remember, it goes from one place to another on a signal path. And this is where it gets to be fun because every device you use in Ableton Live or in any studio, it goes in a path from one to the next in a straight line. So if you have a problem with your sound and you're getting some distortion or something you don't like, you can go backwards through the path, identify every place that sound is touching, and find the place to clean it up. This is really common with guitar pedals where one pedal might be crazy noisy and your whole thing sounds bad, and then you find that one thing and turn it off and you're like, oh my gosh, this just got so much cleaner. So the signal path is what we use for diagnostics on sounds that don't sound right and for gain staging because you essentially want to check the levels of your signal at every place along the signal path. And fortunately, I'll show you in video part 2 with Ableton Tools. Ableton gives us tools to measure the signal level at every place on the signal path, which is the act of gain staging. It's measuring the level at every place on the path to make sure you have the optimum sound. Now, what is noise floor? That's a word you want to understand. It just means the background noise. Right now, my noise floor includes the computer fan, maybe some traffic outside. If I scratch my shirt, if you hear that, or if I bump the mic, like those little accidental things that you don't want to hear, those are your noise floor. That's the background noise. That's what you don't want in your recordings and you don't want in your mix. In a mix, your noise floor comes from, well, it's pretty clean because we're in the digital environment. But if you do have some plugins that are adding like saturator drive or something, and then when the music stops, you still hear a little bit of like shh, that would be an example of noise floor coming from a digital source. Or if you're using like isotope vinyl and you're adding that vinyl crackle that makes a little bit of like a realistic sound of a record needle spinning on a dirty record, that's an example of noise floor or background noise that's kind of cool because it gives you texture and tells a little bit of a story of where the sound comes from. In general, digital sources are really clean, so you don't have to worry about noise floor too much, but you need to know what the word means for this really essential term, signal to noise ratio. Now we know what signal is, that's the sound we want. We know what noise is, that's the background noise we don't want. Signal to noise ratio is a measurement of how much sound you have compared to how much sound you don't want. And nobody uses math for this. It's not like actually writing down numbers. It just means you want the best quality sound you can get and the least amount of noise you can avoid. So for me with a mic, I set the mic at the right input level. I put myself the right distance away. I try to record in a quiet place. I record in the morning when it's not cars honking their horns or whatever. You want to get the best amount of sound, the loudest, clearest sound you can get without the background noise. So signal to noise ratio is really important in gain staging because the way to get a good signal to noise ratio is to make sure you always have a consistent level going through your whole signal path. That's where you use your peak level meters to measure how loud your signal is or how high your level is to make sure that every device in your signal path has an optimal level and you're not amplifying a quiet sound with a whole bunch of background noise and turning up the background noise by mistake. So what's the best quality sound? Well, everybody knows, hey, loud and clear, but for electronic music, we always want to have a lot of bass too. What happens if you don't have a good signal to noise ratio and you try to turn it up too loud to get more of the sound you want? Well, you can get distortion. Distortion is like burnt toast. You can't undo it. Once it's in a recording, you can't just like remove it or erase it or something. I mean, you can try to clean it up, but once a sound is distorted, there is no going back. It's kind of like, well, you can't unburn the toast, just, for an example. I want to show you what this sounds like, just in case you're not sure. So I'm gonna play a sound. It's gonna be a little bit of a mix, and you're gonna hear it first clean, and then I'm gonna kick in a whole bunch more volume to make it distort. So get ready for this to be a little bit loud. Here we go. I'm sorry for how that sounds, but that's what it's like. Distortion means the sound breaks up. It's not clear. It sounds like it's ripped. It's like a piece of paper that gets ripped, and you don't want that in your mix. A cool thing about live is that there's some internal architecture in the audio engine. So on your individual channels, if some of them turn red once in a while, it's not the end of the world. I mean, they could be completely red the whole time, and you're not going to hear it at the individual channel level. But it's really important on the master channel not to have your master channel distorting, because that's going to send a distorted signal out to your audio interface, and you will actually hear that. So that's important to keep an eye on it. What are we talking about with levels turning red and green? Well, there's a word called clipping, and that means that the audio waveform is actually getting chopped off. Let me describe this with an analogy. So in the ocean, we have ocean waves. When you're looking at them far out, they're this nice, round, rolling thing that is just beautiful. You just watch it all day long. Waves are coming in. What happens when they get to the beach? Well, at the bottom of the wave, that nice curve, the trough, it hits the sand. It squishes the bottom of the waveform, which affects the top of the waveform, and the top of the waveform curls up and breaks and hits the ground as a pile of white foam. So it's no longer a nice curved wave. It is a distorted puddle of foam, which it's awesome at the beach, but when that happens to your audio, it's not so good. Let me give you another example. Let's say you're driving a car and you like to do S-curves. So you're in a big parking lot, you're turning right, you're turning left, the car is going like this and it feels good. It's like, going like this. That's all fine. Now imagine you're in a tunnel with walls. If you're trying to do S-curves, you better keep them pretty small, because as soon as your S-curves get too big, your car hits the side of the tunnel and experiences clipping, where the S-curve gets clipped off, it hits the limit, there's no more space for it to go in a bigger curve, and your car experiences distortion by ripping off the side of the body panels. Those are some analogies of what distortion is like in a circuit, where if you think of music as a waveform, and when you zoom in, you see the waveform making a nice pattern. Well, clipping is what happens when the amplitude of the waveform gets so big, it hits the limit of the circuit and gets clipped off electronically or digitally somehow, and then you hear that as a scratchy, sharp waveform. And this is really important, because if you send a clipped signal to a speaker cabinet, the point where the signal is a straight line getting clipped off, that takes your speaker cone and pushes it to the limit it can go and holds it there until that clipped period is done, and then brings it to the other side and holds it there. And the whole time it's going through that straight line clipped period, the speaker coil is just burning. It's just getting roasted in that one position. Speakers need to oscillate to be healthy. And if you're clipping them all the way from one side to the other, it's not going to be good for the life of your speakers. It's not good for your audience in the ears. It's not good for your sound system. It's not good for your amps. It's not good for your mix. Clipping is not something you really want to do a lot of by accident. Now, there is a world of sound design where we use clipping, like in a guitar where you want distortion on the guitar. It's like, yeah, that sounds good. But clipping by accident, you want to watch out for that. And that's why you should learn about gain staging, so you don't clip your mix, so you do have better sound. And to relate this back to something we actually care about with bass, the more you have a nice big round waveform, the more your speakers can push heavy amounts of air, or push large amounts of air, hit people in the body with air that goes boof, 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 and make them feel it. If your mix is clipped, they're not going to feel the bass because the speaker can't push it because it's clipped against the edge. So no clipping, better bass. Remember that part. We did an example of the master channel clipping red, talked about S-curves in the tunnel. Peaking. All right, peaking is a word that describes what happens in a meter. So let me see if I can show you some peaking. The Ableton meters are peak level meters. So if you say a track is peaking, it means the level meter is going to the top of the peak and going too far. So here we have a kick drum channel. Let me just drag this upwards to see our levels. There's our peak level meter. If I just raise the channel up, +2, the track is peaking. And to be technically specific, the track is peaking on channel 1, but it's not distorting on channel 1 because of Ableton's internal audio engine. So it's okay for an individual channel to peak or to go above the level of 0 dB. But when it gets to the master channel, you don't want to see that happening. So let me just back that back down. So peaking is a word that means, okay, this channel is going above the limit or the sound could be getting clipped. Those are just terms of what we talk about. Peaking, hitting the peak level, exceeding the limit of possible loudness. Okay, on channels, not on master. How do you measure the amount of space you have before clipping starts? Well, that's a word called headroom, which is kind of like thinking of the size of the container or in a door frame when you're walking through a house. Headroom is literally how much space you have before your head hits the door. So if you're 3 meters tall and you're walking through a door frame that's 2 meters high, you're gonna hit the whole top of your body, right? And it hurts when you bump your head. I don't know if you can see in my room, I have angled ceilings and there are some places when I'm setting up stuff where I hit the ceiling and I'm like, headroom. So headroom for your audio means it goes to the top of the available space in the channel and then goes too far and something bad starts to happen. Like on the master channel, we exceeded the available headroom. The channel started to peak or the sound got clipped. Ableton made it turn red for us, so we know, hey, bad, warning. And then we heard the distortion. So headroom is something you need to keep in mind, and your peak level meters can show you the amount of headroom you have. For example, if you put your track fader at 0 dB and reset the peak level meter, you can get a reading of how many dB of headroom you have available. And generally, you want to leave some headroom in your mix. So when you make a mix and you look at the master channel, you should see that the peak level meter, there's still some headroom. There's some space to expand in case a loud sound comes through. It's not going to distort. Headroom is a good thing. It's your friend. It's, you want to have some space. You could think of it like having a few extra spots. Like if you're in a room and you have like 10 people, you might want to have like 15 chairs just in case some more friends come. Like a rough analogy of having extra headroom. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like the available loudness before clipping or the limit of possible loudness. And that brings us to where we can talk about gain. A lot of people think gain is the same as volume. It's not really. Gain comes from the electronics world where it's an electronic term meaning the level of signal passing in a circuit, like the input level, or like how big is the waveform going through a circuit. The part that we hear as volume happens after it goes to a speaker and it goes through the air and we're like, oh, that's loud, or it's louder than this or quieter than this. Volume is a little tricky to define depending on where you measure it, but gain is something you can measure with voltage in a circuit. You can measure it with milliwatts. I mean, there's a bunch of ways, and digitally we can measure it using our peak level meters inside Live, and we're gonna talk about that in the next video about tools, where I show you exactly what all these little green meters are and what they do. They're not VU meters, they're peak level meters. This is the confusion. People say, oh, the VU level. I used to say it all the time. A VU meter is the one with a needle and a piece of analog equipment that measures the average signal level, and it's great for analog, but in the digital world, we're using peak level meters. So now that we understand that gain is the level in a circuit, to demonstrate this, let me play the kick drum. I'm gonna mute the channel. Now we have 0 output, right? We don't hear it. The channel is grayed out, but when you click on the kick drum channel and do Shift Tab to see the device view, there is a peak level meter still showing some signal. And that's measuring the amount of gain coming through that channel. So gain is something that can happen even if you don't hear it at all. It's still happening, and it's still something you can adjust to make sure you have the right sound coming out when you unmute the channel and bring it into the mix. So gain staging, now that we know what gain staging means going through every channel in the mix and setting the gain to have the maximum signal to noise ratio to use the available headroom so that when you bring up the fader in your mix, you get a nice, healthy, loud sound and not some skinny little washed out sound. I like to use an analogy of if you're a coffee drinker, you have espresso and then you have really watery drip coffee. So gain staging is like, if somebody wants espresso, you have to give them a really strong cup of coffee. You don't want to add a whole bunch of milk to water it down and make it colder, and then add a whole bunch of water too, and then take that whole thing and dump it in the bathtub, and then scoop up a handful of that bathtub and be like, here's your coffee. they're going to be like, what the hell is this? That's not what we're trying to do, because you'd be watering down the coffee at every step of adding all that crap and garbage. Well, audio is the same thing. If you think about a great kick drum sample or an 808 where it's like, that's like an espresso, like a little cup of hot, strong espresso. You want the end listener to have that same experience, which means you can't turn down the volume and then, raise everything else up in the mix and then have your vocals in some weird place. And by the time you hear it, the 808s are all lost and muddy and mushy and crowded, and it doesn't have that same effect. A bad mix is kind of like taking a cup of coffee, dumping it in the bathtub, and trying to drink the bathtub and thinking you're drinking coffee. Doesn't work that way. You want to preserve the signal to noise ratio so you have loud and clear sounds that can drop some bass at the master channel without distorting the mix. And for a final tip about gain staging, I want to recommend faders down, monitors up. That's the number one thing I can recommend to people. Really common mistake is that people try to get a loud mix by taking their faders and jacking them up inside the program. Don't do that, because then it hits the master channel, it gets all clipped, and then they're like, oh, I got this new limiter plugin, I got all these compressor chains to fix the clipping. No, that's not how you make a loud mix. You make a loud mix by making a balanced mix that has headroom on the master channel, and then you go to your amp and turn it up so the speakers can push some air to hit your body with those sound waves so you feel the bass drop. That's really what you're doing. It's the mastering engineers who take the audio file and turn it up with the 5 different super hardware boutique compressors and everything. Don't let me get too far ahead of myself. Let's just wrap it up with a simple gain staging definition that you can use right now in your own tracks. Gain staging is the art and science of measuring and adjusting your signal at every level. Let me fix that. Gain staging is measuring and adjusting your sound at every place it goes through your entire mix, from individual channels, through your groups and everything, out to the master, okay? For a simple definition, measure and adjust. It's like optimizing your signal to noise ratio, using the available headroom, not clipping, not distorting, all that kind of stuff. That's what we're doing with gain staging. And when you go inside this full course, I'm going to show you how to do it inside Ableton with the tools we have available to measure and adjust your sounds, so you get loud, clear mixes that drop some bass and you don't bang your head on the desk all day long trying to fix mistakes in the low end, the mid-range, the highs, all that kind of stuff. It gets so much easier when you start with gain staging. To continue, let's go to part 2. We're going to talk about gain staging tools you need. And this does not mean buying any kind of expensive stuff. It means understanding what's inside Ableton Live that you can use for gain staging in your mixes starting right now. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.